Welcome to Struggles of the Spirit. I'm your host, the Reverend Leland Udell. Here we are again. I seem to say that refrain every year, every day, every month, every week. It's a standby for me, and I'm really glad to be with you. It's fun to share these kinds of days with the public. And we hope that you will really participate today and phone in and tell us what you think about our subject and how you like our presentation and what your own ideas are, what you might add to the program. Because this program has your input as a vital part of it. And if you don't say anything, you just listen, well, it's more how can you put it, slow-paced and not very fresh, whereas you make it fresh and vivid. And my guest is going to be a great asset here. But you fill him out and you fill me out by your phoning in. So you just pick up your phone and call the number. Now, Stewart, you can see it. I can't. On the wall is the phone number to call. You see it?
Well, there's something in front of it.
Oh.
Blocking it. I can't actually see it.
Well, that's usually...
It's 651-0589.
651-0589.
Okay. Thank you. 651
0589.
See, the sign speaks here. This is an unusual studio. So, dear public, dear viewers, when you want to say something here on the program, that's the number to call. You will not get a secretary or a menu or one of those horrible things. You'll get Bill, who's a delightful man, and he'll tell you what exactly to do, and we'll be plugged in together, and so we'll talk with each other. So you'll be the third person in this room once you identify yourself and come on camera with the not exactly camera, but on microphone, I guess you would say. And so please phone in. And if you're watching this show and it's not live anymore because we've gone home to do other things, what you can do is to phone us, or rather not phone us, but send us an email message. The email address of the studio is on your screen, and it's down at the bottom of the frame, and you can use that address for our email address, and we'll get back to you. Not instantly, but over a period of days, we'll get to you and communicate with you. So we'd like to respond to anything you have to say. So please participate with us. It makes my guest and me feel a lot bouncier and fulfilled to hear somebody from outside of the studio calling in. So Bill, not Bill, that's our Stewart. Bill is our technician. Stewart, why don't you tell us a little bit about your subject today, what we're going to be talking about together.
Well, what's been my main interest over the last 35 or 40 years has been working with change and working with people who are involved in change. It came about in a very unusual way. I began my career as a special ed teacher, and for 13 years enjoyed that a lot, but was based on the system I was in, began to worry that I might be there forever, and I really wanted some new challenges. That took me into both real estate and construction, and by happenstance, I got involved in a group from MIT called SOL.
How do you spell SOL?
S-O-L, Society of Organizational Learning. In fact, people that are interested can simply Google SOL, Cambridge, Mass, or Boston, Mass, and they'll find the address. But it's a group of people involved in developing techniques and tools to sustain change. And a lot of the work that I've been involved in has been going into small companies and working with the leadership of that company at whatever level. It typically isn't the top tier leadership, it's cross-functional, and trying to create change in that company and a culture of change, and developing tools and practice with those employees and members of the organization in activities that allow them to create new processes, new systems, so on and so forth. And as I've mentioned to you in the past, it can be often inspirational to see how people embrace change, particularly when they're clear on the results they want from all this change.
The public sometimes hates change, doesn't want anything altered at all. They want it the old way. Do you have that resistance?
Oh, sure. It's very common. As soon as you begin to bring people out of their comfort zone or what they're used to, it can be a difficult task. And it tends to be one that will create some movement towards a goal, and then there seems to be typically a natural regression as they find things uncomfortable or somewhat new or unsettling. They'll tend to revert back to their old behaviors. But that's what I've been excited about, because through the work that I've done, it's been all about getting tools that make it more comfortable for people to do that. And again, it usually involves a lot of practice at this, but it is rewarding, and it has happened. I've seen transitions over and over again in different situations. Sometimes it just affects individuals, and in fact, a lot of the work can be one-on-one kinds of work where you're just mentoring and coaching certain personnel in a company.
You must have heard about the work of Gene Robinson, Bishop of New Hampshire.
I have.
And how he's been hassled and persecuted for his stance about about being gay and a bishop in the Episcopal Church. And he has said on more than one occasion, he has said that if he doesn't speak out, then somebody else has to. And so let's get it done with and dealt with. And he's willing to take on the hazards and the pain and the suffering of being different, and letting the public know about it and acting on it. I think he's a brave man. When he was ordained bishop, he had to wear a bulletproof vest.
Oh my goodness.
And I don't know how often people who are into change in your area have to wear bulletproof vests.
We've been able to avoid bulletproof vests. But I think I can somewhat understand those fears can be powerful. And in corporate cultures, it can also be very threatening personally to people, because you're affecting possibly, at least in terms of their imagination and fantasies, possibly their compensation plans, career paths, seniority issues, all kinds of things like that. But what I found more effective than just trying to create change is allowing people to take the time to, first of all, share a vision, get some commonality between what they want to change. And if they tend to create that goal, it seems to be a lot easier to attain than if they feel like it's been imposed on them or discussed by the owner or the president or the leader of the company. If the employees themselves are the ones that develop the path we're all going to try and go to, it seems to be much more effective. So one of the first and most important initiatives is usually first getting a clear idea of what the leadership of the company does want to do, and then take the time, and this is where it's a little difficult, particularly with the leadership, because they are operational people usually. They want to get things done, and taking the time to share that vision and get everyone involved in clarifying that, to me, is the most important step. If everybody shares that goal to the point where they can almost taste it, it's almost a palpable thing, it's extremely easy to figure out what we need to do to get there.
How do you get people willing to do that?
Well, it takes dialogue, I guess, mainly. There's, in the body of work from Soul, there's an awful lot of focus on some basic disciplines that this group feels if people have these disciplines, things can change easier. Mm-hmm. And one of them is the ability to challenge mental models. You have very strong feelings, I'm sure, about many things in life. And I think people that are good at embracing change are willing to challenge those, willing to discuss them openly with other people, mm-hmm. Because they're confident in these core values or core feelings. And they also usually are the kind of people that if by discussion they find that their values may not be correct, they're quite willing to consider some changes. So one of the first things that we try and do is, and we do this through a series of exercises, usually hopefully fun, entertaining, somewhat disarming, mm-hmm. not at all mm-hmm. Difficult. And these exercises get people to identify core values that they have and discuss them with each other. And surprisingly, a lot of people share similar values. Mm-hmm. Wanting to be the best they can be at their job, honesty, candidness, trustworthiness, whatever. These are fairly common values, and these values, when you spend the time talking about them, can slowly be brought into the context of the overall vision. The company might want to be the #1 customer service-oriented company in their market, whatever it mm-hmm. might be. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, I can remember working with small, just local oil companies and who wanted to be the best service provider in their area. And that's the way they were going to compete, by providing the best service. Well, it wasn't difficult to get a lot of people in that company, and we're always looking for that critical number. We never know how many that might be, but a lot of the people in that company to share that goal. That's not a difficult goal for people to strive for. And then it's a matter of getting all of those people and anybody else in the company that we can recruit or bring into this effort to actually take responsibility for some of the action steps that it's going to be required to achieve this goal. So, again, through a series of exercises and activities, you clarify that vision, and if the vision gets strong enough and clear enough, people want to get involved. They want to participate.
Well, your job is to clarify what those visions are. Is that right?
Well, help them clarify it.
It.
Yes, I really try and, in fact, when things are going well, I pretty much disappear. I'm at the table, kind of keep the discussions and conversations and activities focused, but when things are working well, I barely am involved. Most of my work is done at the time when we're explaining the overall process to everybody.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Initially, a lot of the work is with the senior leadership, just trying to get clear in my mind with them what they want to try and do. At that point, when that's accomplished, then we get a critical number of employees, usually representatives of all the hierarchy in the organization, from the very bottom to the very top. And once we have that group together, and that usually numbers anywhere from 8 to 10 or 12 people, these would be people that their colleagues trust and they want to be involved and they volunteered to do it. Nobody's coerced. Sometimes we will recruit. If one of the senior leaderships has a particular person they really want involved in this and they haven't volunteered, then we'd attempt to recruit them, but nobody's forced into this
Mm-hmm.
activity.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just begin the work of meeting regularly and working on your plan.
Word gets around.
Word does get around. We always like to kind of culminate a lot of this work with some special event that kind of is important enough to signify to the entire organization that this is the beginning of something. Typically we'll have an evening event where people get dressed up and we actually introduce all the ideas that this group of people have put together. Now obviously everybody in the company knows about everything discussed that night because they've all been involved in some way. It could be by answering surveys or small little side discussions that happen between our formal meetings. But the activity in general is really designed to get as many people as involved as possible, share an awful lot of information, and come up with a plan that allows everybody to know exactly what they need to do today to contribute towards that common goal that might be 4 or 5 years down the road.
That's a pretty ambitious task.
It does. It takes a lot of time. Some of this work can run into literally months and months of meetings, once a week, twice a week. And there's a lot of pieces to it depending on what the company wants to do. I've been in some companies where it's been very comprehensive. We want to start with a performance evaluation system and a brand new pay compensation system. We're going to reorganize the hierarchy of the company. We're going to kind of flatten out the organizational structure so it's more horizontal and less vertical. And that's pretty ambitious. That could be more or less months and years worth of work.
I would think that would be.
It often has been.
I'm old enough now to have lived through some rather traumatic events in our society, and some of them were not dealt with very well. I remember, I'm a New Yorker originally from Manhattan. I remember we had an evening newspaper that we used to read on the train going home at night. It was called the New York Sun, and it was popular, and people liked to catch up on the latest news as they rode home on the train, and it had a big circulation. I remember the union was pushing for more money for their employees, and the company said, "We don't have more money to give you. We're giving you the max that we can do. If we give you more, it will cripple us, and it will probably result in the demise of the whole organization." And well, the union was adamant about it, and so the company well, ceased to be. And the last newspaper that they published had a headline that said, "The sun has set."
Oh, that's sad.
That was their last headline.
Uh-huh.
The sun has set. And in that kind of a situation, I don't think that the union people believed that the organization, old chiefs, they doubted that they were telling the truth. They thought they had millions and millions and millions, and they could easily give us a lot more money. And they didn't believe the leaders when they said we're at our max. How do you get people to believe what they're being told?
Wow, if things have got to that point, it becomes very difficult, because those, and I'll refer back to that same terminology I used earlier, those mental models that both sides have of one another are so entrenched, it's difficult to challenge them.
That's the big task that you guys have, I think.
It is. And to be honest with you, I've kind of been careful as to what organizations and who I am going to work with, because I guess particularly at this point in my life, I recognize some challenges as being too big for me. The problems are too severe. The gaps are too wide. And the patience and tolerance and time that it would take to bridge those gaps don't exist in the leadership of the company. And in those situations, all I can do is tell them that I'm fearful of getting involved because the problem seems so deep and severe. What I would hope people would do is at least begin in those discussions I talked about, even though I'm very leery about getting right into those kinds of discussions. They need to happen in order to get anything done. Excuse me.
How do you get the trust of the opposite side, whether it's management or the employees? How do you achieve their trust so that people believe what the other side is saying? How do you do that?
Well, again, it takes a commitment from both sides to sit down and begin talking frankly with each other. Those conversations tend to initially be messy and very frustrating unless they're carefully facilitated, which my role then would become very important. And I would try and start those discussions about some common interest subjects that aren't that serious, aren't that upsetting. Mm-hmm. But begin to get those people just sharing information. You know, this is my concern, and this is why, and we explore that, and we try and encourage each side to listen and challenge, and, you know, can you give me more evidence of why you feel that way, and just allow that dialogue to develop. It sounds, you know, when I describe this stuff, I often feel like people who haven't experienced it probably aren't going to want to get involved in these kinds of things, because it sounds kind of Pollyannish, I guess, that, you know, we can talk our way through some of these issues. But I have seen it. I've seen people who are very distrustful develop a certain level of trust, at least a working trust, within an organization that's designed to produce something or make something. I mean, this isn't usually a situation that could be as emotional as a marriage situation or something like that. This is work, and we have family and friends to go home to at night. So typically you can find issues that people can begin talking about for the purpose of getting to know each other and trust each other, rather than just exploring that particular issue. If I sit with you long enough, despite my mistrust, and I get to share enough conversation, I'm probably going to begin to be a little more open to your thoughts and ideas. But it's a challenge, there's no question about it. I've been in situations where the proverbial can of worms gets opened up, and it seems as if the dialogue does more harm than good. And we've had situations where we've had to stop dialogues for a while and kind of take a time out, work on other things, more pragmatic, more operational. But again, you can also structure dialogues with a theme or an agenda. So if I have my own preference when I go into a company, before I'd start any dialogue, would actually accomplish something, would get that group together that I talked about, and would actually accomplish some objective that the company wanted to do, maybe a new performance evaluation form or something fairly simple and non-threatening, and to give everybody a sense that, oh, okay, so whatever those people that go to that room once a week are doing, it's not going to hurt me.
Mm-hmm.
But again, all that work needs to be very transparent. It needs to be discussed and assimilated into the company as quick as possible, so people aren't thinking that somehow this is a special group that goes behind closed doors and they're going to affect my life somehow. All that work needs to be done in a way that keeps everybody informed of everything that's going on and the purpose behind it all. And
that's an immense task.
It does, and as I talk about it, you know, I realize that it must appear that way, but when it happens in an organization, it happens week by week in a very slow, kind of steady pace. I often will relate it to, I was involved in some therapy work when I was younger, with family counseling when I was a special ed teacher, and I actually ran an intake group for Easter SEALs that dealt with court referrals. And one of the keys to a good therapeutic experience is that regular routine where people can plan that every Monday at 3 o'clock we're going to be talking. And there's kind of a natural rhythm to that develops. That same rhythm you can create within an organization, that business rhythm where people know that on this particular day everybody in the company is doing this. There's always a rhythm to organizations. In churches, I'm sure that rhythm culminates usually every Sunday with more activity than you might have than on a Monday or whatever. So getting those meetings established in a very predictable way is very helpful too. But then, you know, the overwhelming task of kind of recreating yourself is not what you're thinking about all the time. It's next week's meeting. It's the task I have to do this week. And as long as that task is kind of part of the overall strategy to attain our goal, whatever it is, we're making progress. And there are tools to do that. And that's what I do. I introduce the tools and allow people to practice using them until they can do it themselves.
Well, it's we would say in the religious world, you need a lot of prayer.
There is a lot of prayer. But again, there's, let me give you a sense of some of the tools. There's a fellow named Robert Fritz who's developed a paradigm called the path of least resistance.
Well, I'm familiar with that term.
Oh, yes, good. Well, Robert, who began his career as a composer, developed this paradigm that suggests people can attain their goals if they carefully construct what he calls a structural tension chart. Let's talk about a couple of things, but before I introduce the chart, let me just describe another paradigm that he feels a lot of people fall into that does create so many problems when they're trying to change. And we can take, let's say, a person who's trying to lose weight or stop smoking or whatever. What he would suggest is there's an awful lot of things that they've developed, whether it's habits or environment or whatever, that facilitates the problem they're struggling with. I've heard people talk about how if they sit in a certain chair, they want to instantly crave a cigarette because this has always been the chair they go to when they smoke or whatever. But there is definitely a bunch of habits and environmental issues that put people in a position where they may smoke or they eat more than they want to. So now they want to get on a diet, and they, through just sheer force of will, begin to lose weight or whatever. As they get closer and closer to their goal, and you want to think about this as, think of what they're doing in a more graphic way. Let's say all this bundle of habits and environmental things are like a giant post in the ground, and we're going to put a big rubber band around that post, and we're going to also put ourselves inside that rubber band. So our goal is to move away from all these things that cause us to eat more or smoke more, and go closer and closer to this other post. No smoking, no eating. But as we get closer to it, that rubber band stretches tighter and tighter, trying to pull us back into those old habits. There's another rubber band that's hitched around the goal we have, and it also is hitched in us. Well, what we've got is this constant creative tension as we get further and further away from our old habits and closer to our goal. The force pulling us to the goal lessens, and the force trying to pull us back to those old habits strengthen. So we end up oscillating, going back and forth. We make an attempt to lose weight, we lose a little bit weight. Then the urge to lose weight dissipates a bit. And maybe we don't have to lose as much weight as we thought we did. I can snack on this a little bit, and you start to slip back towards those old habits. And you're kind of like a yo-yo going back and forth. Well, Robert Fritz introduced kind of a new paradigm, and he said, let's forget about these forces tugging you back and forth and create just a simple path. And he calls it this path of least resistance. But in a nutshell, what he's suggesting is you need to work on where you want to go and develop this crystal clear vision. I can give you a great example of a fellow that had this ability to create this incredibly clear goal. I worked at an organization where there was a young finance officer in the company, very young, and I'm not sure whether he was had an awful lot of education, but he was a real had a tremendous work ethic, and he was kind of a go-getter, and he was in this position of having a lot to do with the finances of the company. And I went in to see him one day, and he's awkwardly sitting in his chair behind the desk, and I couldn't really figure out why he appeared to be so awkward. His knees were kind of looked like they were almost tucked up under his under his desk. So as we talked a little bit, I finally had to find out what was going on. So I said, Nate, are you standing on something, or what's going on under your desk? And he kind of laughed and he said, well, I'm a little embarrassed to tell you, but I have a tire under here. So he calls me around his desk, and he's sitting there with his feet on a wheel and a brand new tire off of a new car that he's going to own in 6 months. And he has the tire under his desk to remind himself every minute of his working day that he's going to own this car. And he used it as a motivational trick to keep him totally focused on things that would generate the income necessary to buy that car. Nate had an uncanny way of keeping himself totally focused on his goal. And he did that in everything in his life. At that point in his life, he tended to be somewhat materialistic, obviously. But he also applied it towards his girlfriend and the relationship there. And he talked about how he actually had a hat from his girlfriend that he loved to see her in, that was a constant reminder rather than a picture. But my point is that this new paradigm Fritz talks about tries to get you focused first and foremost on what do you really want to achieve? What is it that you want to accomplish? And you describe that as best you can. And if you can quantify it with any ways to measure how you'd know when you achieve this goal or whatever, those are good things to have in that little description of where you want to go, what you want to be, so on and so forth. I want to lose 63 pounds by April 13th, 2009. Quantify it as much as you can, be as clear as you can. And then step 2 would be describe the reality that you're in right now relative to that goal.
You try to establish clear goals that you can meet as time goes by, so you're encouraged by the change. Is that something you try to do?
That's step 3.
Okay.
You stumbled upon the key. So you start with the vision, the goal. You describe the reality relative to that goal. I now weigh 203 pounds. It's December 3rd, 2002. I'm going to be at this weight, at this date, so on and so forth. And then simply, and this is the part of the exercise that a lot of people will trip themselves up in. Briefly, without a lot of thought, maybe 10 or 15 minutes of thought, describe a few action steps that would get you from where you want to be to where you want to go. And it's amazing how most people can come up with 4 or 5 things that they need to do. Once you've done that, you've basically created a master plan. Next to each one of those action steps, you want to put a name and a deadline. And then it's just a matter of revisiting that plan on a regular basis. There's also another tier to this activity where from each action step you can actually create a new plan. So let's actually create one just to give you an idea of what we're talking about. Let's say we are in an organization and our organization is a church and we want to increase the membership of the church by 10% over the next 12 months. Well, I would be willing to bet that if you sat down with 6 or 7 of your colleagues, that inner sanctum, your trusted few, you could come up with 5 or 6 action steps that need to be taken to achieve that goal of increased membership in 12 months. And next to each one of those, you would assign or ask who would take responsibility for that. Let's say we're going to increase our, one of the action steps, and I'm just kind of making this up. Maybe I should ask you to help me.
I'll try.
I'm sure you've gone through that kind of effort before. But maybe one of the action steps might be to increase your exposure to the public. You're going to use the media or initiate some marketing effort. Well, you would ask someone to volunteer to take responsibility for that aspect of it. Who wants to be in charge of researching and developing some kind of a marketing strategy? Okay, great. So-and-so raises their hand and their name goes down. And then you simply ask them, when will you be done?
Oh, that's really
now,
close.
Initially, obviously, they have no idea. They might not even have thought they'd be involved in this activity when they came to the meeting. Now, all of a sudden, they find themselves responsible for that step. But I would urge them, using sound reasoning and good judgment, to come up with a guess. We're not going to hold you to it. It's not accurate. It will be modified, but we need a date. Well, I think I can have something pulled together within 3 months. Okay, so we would write down a date. And we continue to do that with all the other action steps. And then if you think about it, all we're going to do for the rest of the time we work together is to revisit our plan. And next week we're going to go back and we're going to say to whoever took responsibility for the marketing, how are you doing? Do you think you're still on track for that date? No. As a matter of fact, after looking at what I volunteered to do, I realize I'm going to need help. Number one, I think 6 months might be more realistic, but I also need help. And through a series of those kinds of meetings, you would be shifting resources, going to find help for people, talking about what you've discovered, but you're constantly going back to that action step and saying, how are we doing? What have we accomplished? What else do we need to do? And you're modifying your plan, but you're always making any changes relative to that goal. And it's amazing how once the process starts and people get into that routine, the progress is visible, and you can actually begin to see things happening that will create.
That's exciting.
It can be very exciting.
Because we all of us, we have dreams and hopes and wishes, and but we know that most of the time they never materialize. And so here you have a device to make them happen.
I do. Obviously, I don't personally, but this work, and again, if I'm not sure if we've talked about the whole premise of SOUL, but that Society of Organizational Learning has a network of incredibly powerful organizations and people, all involved in this change activity. And a lot of the things that are really interesting is these tools that I just discussed, for instance, the structural tension charting, and this is only one very small little piece of the overall work, but are being used by a lot of organizations all over the world. And what SOUL does is collect the data from all this effort. So, and share it with everybody involved in the organization. So I can talk about this structural tension chart, and I hope that I can begin to suggest that it's a very powerful tool and it's a very effective tool. And the reason I can do that is I've seen examples of how it's worked. I've not only been involved in them myself, but I've seen other organizations using these tools. And I've seen the results. So I know it's effective. And it's just a matter of using these techniques and tools enough to get comfortable and good at it.
Can't hear.
Pardon?
I'm not following.
So again, the tools that we've been talking about are just that.
Okay.
They're individual tools people can use. They can use them individually. I mean, you can, as Nate did, you can create a vision for something, and I'm sure everybody's done it in one way or another. I think one of the things that make that particular tool powerful is realizing that there are details in the planning, and kind of, you know, you've heard the phrase, devil's in the details. It's true. You can have a goal, and if you haven't thought out all of the steps you need to get involved in to accomplish that goal, you probably aren't going to be accomplishing that as well as somebody who has taken the time to actually listed each step they need to take, put some responsibility to that by putting somebody in charge of that, and giving yourself a deadline. It's amazing how when these groups of people begin to come back to the meetings week after week,
The report.
and when it's your turn to report, and you say, well, I actually don't think I need as much time to accomplish my action step as I thought. I'm going to be done in 2 weeks. Well, I can tell you the pressure that puts on other people who are responsible for getting something done. It can be very, very powerful when you begin to see people actually accomplishing things, getting things done. It creates a synergy in the group. It also identifies who are the good planners, who are people who seem to be very realistic in their expectations, who are the dreamers, and those are not bad things to identify when you're in an organization. I know I've been in situations where people felt guilty because they realized they're really not good at getting things done. But there's nothing wrong with pointing out how important it is to have a dreamer in the organization, to have somebody who wants to reflect more and think internally more than the person that just wants to get things done.
At this point, I'd like to get some feedback from our viewers, and you must be hearing this input with some amazement and some excitement and some skepticism perhaps, but we'd like to hear you phone in and talk with Stewart and with me about your own experience at change, your disappointment with change, and your joy over change. We really would like to hear from you. Please phone us and let us hear your voice, and we can talk about what actually happened in your life. It would be a lot of fun to do that.
It would. And the number is 651-0589.
Thank you, Stewart.
I just saw that. Well, it is. It's actually inspiring. I mentioned that before, but there was one particular event I'll never forget. I was in a plumbing company, a lot of blue-collar workers, and we worked for probably 4 or 5 months,
Wow.
meeting every single week for 3 hours a meeting, developing a new compensation plan. So this was something very nerve-wracking. This was going to affect everybody's rice bowl, quote unquote. And the process and the time we took to put that group together was long enough and done carefully enough, and done in a way that actually gained the trust of everybody in the company. So we had people at that table every single week that everyone trusted. This wasn't a large company, it was only 30 or 40 people. And the 10 or 12 people at that meeting every week had a lot of credibility within the entire group. So we were very fortunate that way. We finished our work, and the rest of the employees kind of knew most of the details. But again, we wanted to make the introduction of this new plan a big deal, because we all felt it was a big deal. First of all, the way we developed it, we created the transition from the old plan to the new plan based on the individual employees. They could adopt to embrace the new plan, or they could stay in the old plan. They weren't forced to do anything. So we thought we had a great plan. And I asked the group, well, how do you want to roll this out? How do we want to actually get into the nuts and bolts? And, well, let's have an evening presentation. Now, one of the truck drivers raises his hand and says, I think we should have a slideshow and have a really big deal. So
how would you do that?
Well, that would be my job. I offer in my services the ability to put together PowerPoints or whatever. So I said, great, if you want to do this, I'll pull together graphics. You are going to have to create the narratives and the little script, and I'll put it in, and we'll put it together, and we'll try and do this as professionally as we could. And we did the best job we could, and the night came for this big presentation, and everybody was invited to a dinner. And then after the dinner, we were going to have this little slideshow, and everybody was going to get up and speak. I was not going to be at all a part of this. And the evening comes, and everybody comes in, and the truck driver that I had referred to earlier, who had never stood up in front of a group of people in his life, shows up in the first suit he had ever bought in his life. And
wow.
He put on the most incredible and inspirational presentation I have ever seen. And he started out by saying, the only other time that I did have a tie on, I ended up married at the end of that day. And it broke the ice, everybody laughed, and then we went on to introduce this new plan. And it was very successful, but he told me later that he said, I literally feel like I'm a different person than when I started this work. And, you know, I think just the fact that he went out and bought a suit for that evening, nobody expected him to do that. Nobody.
That was his own desire.
Totally on his own. He wanted for everybody in the company to see him rolling out this new program in a suit, because he felt it was that important to the company. It was pretty neat to be part of that.
Well, you know, I'm not in industry at all, and but I've lived long enough, so I've seen American industry and watched it change and grow and alter itself. And I'm also enough of a thinker and a critic of society that I really wonder why certain things take place. And I guess Bill has told us we only have 5 minutes left, and then we're off the air. So I don't know. I'm getting long-winded, but I'll be very brief. You know, if you had been around, Stewart, and had told us about the American auto industry, you know, whatever happened? We used to have this immense automobile world that we were behind, and a lot of money, a lot of invention, and now it's largely gone. There's Japanese and Chinese and British perhaps, but why did we encourage all of that as a nation and as political figures when we knew it was going to decimate our world of business? And
I don't know. It's very frustrating. I've had one, or shared one experience, or I can share quickly a brief story. One thing Sol did do, and Peter Singhi was involved in this personally, but I saw it after the fact and read about it. He was actually hired by Ford Motor Company 10 or 15 years ago to get involved with a group of engineers that was given the assignment of creating a new car. I think it was one of the new Lincoln models. And he said, I will be glad to work with this group if you will let me have absolute total control.
Wow.
So the Ford Motor culture is absolutely gone. I want to be able to do whatever I want to. Well, quickly, because we have such little time, I can tell you that he spent, I think they had an 18-month window to create this new car. He spent 3 to 4 months simply in dialogue, forcing these engineers and administrators to sit down and talk to each other. Marketing, talk to the engineers. Research, talk to the... And they began to see where each area was in conflict with each other. Oh, that's why you always scream to do this. I didn't understand. They began to understand each other. The bottom line is they built that car. They came in under budget and 4 months early. It was a record for Ford. Ford had never developed a car that fast and did it under budget. They, for instance, I can give you little simple ideas. They took what used to be fragmented components where you'd have an engineer working on the carburetor, an engineer working on this part of it, and they put one person in charge of the entire drivetrain. By the way, similar to what Toyota does. So they don't have different nuts and bolts in this piece and in that piece. They're all interchangeable. They're all so on and so forth. But because they understood each other's problems, and because they exposed the difficulties they were having immediately prior to this experiment, if they were falling behind with their job, they would tend not to tell other people. They were embarrassed. They didn't want to. Until it became critical, that information never came out, and it would cause all these delays. After the dialogue, they couldn't wait to come to the table and say, I'm in trouble. We can't do what we said we could do. I need help. And everybody would focus on helping get over that. I'm not sure if that kind of a culture is the answer, but I know that in that particular case, Ford Motors was able to do something they had never done before.
Well, thank you. I hear our music coming back, and it tells me that we're just about going to be turned off the air. So thank you very much. It was Stewart Anderson talking with us about change and how to accomplish change in the industry and in your personal life and in all kinds of ways. Thank you, Stewart, for being here and sharing yourself.
It was fun.
I wish we had another hour.
Yes.
At least.
Yes.
So, thank you.